Over the last 2 years, there's been an overall 5% increase in the amount of suicides documented in the United States, per the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Close to 50,000 Americans last year alone lost their lives due to suicide. The U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy stated, "Mental health has become the defining public health and societal challenge of our time. Far too many people and their families are suffering and feeling alone." Tonight, we here at the FCP want to not only bring awareness to the disease, but to also have a transparent conversation on what are the best preventative measures someone can take to hopefully avoid this from happening, and also let you know that one, you're not alone. Two, there's always another option. And most importantly, three, you are not put here on this earth to leave this way. As always, please come lock in. Sean, take us away.
Thank you so much, Kenny. We just want to thank everybody who's joining us here this evening. Uh, we want to pull away from our usual scheduled programming, and we're going to be speaking with Emerita Verdejo. She is a distinguished licensed psychotherapist, CEO, and owner of Pathways of Healing and Social Justice, a vision realized. And I love that part of what you have on your website. She is renowned for her unwavering commitment to holistic mental health and social justice advocacy. With over a decade of dedicated service, she specializes in trauma informed psychotherapeutic interventions, as well as Christian counseling, wellness coaching, education leadership, and psychological evaluations for immigration cases. Her faith driven therapeutic approach, that I'm sure we'll hear about a lot throughout this discussion. She has experience in challenging environments such as the emergency room and domestic violence programs, certifications centered around professional development and trauma that have allowed her to showcase her dedication to employing cutting edge evidence based treatment modalities. Credentials, education consultant and accreditation specialist, immigration evaluation specialist, and that's just to name a few. I mean, there's a lot of them, people. So we're really glad to have her here with her expertise, and then of course advocacy and notable achievements, active participation in lobbying efforts, some notable guest speaker at prestigious events, at addresses at Fordham Graduate School of Social Service commencement ceremony, the New York Academy of Medicine, just to name a few. So I know that was a lot, but it was just right because we have such an esteemed guest, Emerita. We want to thank you for joining us here this evening.
Thank you for having me,
Thank you, thank you. Oh
and thank
man,
you for that introduction.
that was an awesome resume. I gotta definitely step my game up on my side.
Thank you, thank you.
Absolutely. So, as we start this, I mean, the whole concept of this show, just to let everyone know, we want to break the stigma behind suicide prevention awareness. But before we get into that, we just want to ask you some quick questions about you. So, I guess the first place I'll start is, what made you get into your profession?
Woo, that's a loaded one. You ready? It is definitely a calling and a purpose. So I had a career before this, honestly making more money than I am today. It's making good money. And I was told and actually discouraged by some of the scholars that said, don't go that way, go this way. Why would you do that? You know, get your MBA, get this, get that. But I was working in the hospital at Columbia University Medical Center, and I found a lot of doctors dealing with depression, some of them suicidal. We even had a doctor that actually jumped off the roof and died and made the newspapers at Columbia Cornell campus. And it was just something that was weighing on my heart, and I just knew that it was for me. I had my own personal encounters with health issues and depression. And I say that with open disclosure because I want to normalize that we can talk about it and we should talk about it and that it's okay. And there was a psychologist and a social worker that spoke to me and really spoke to my life. So when I went to get this degree, I, said, you know what, God, this lead. And I allowed him to lead me. And boy, did he lead me to seats and places that I didn't even think that I qualified for. So in short, and you probably hear about it more and it'll come out just so that it can help others, because I believe transparency is key in being a clinician as well, being relatable, right? Not just contextual book knowledge. People don't want to hear that. They want to hear, have you been in my shoes? Having experienced trauma has also equipped me to, you know, clinically approach it and to understand it from multiple perspectives, from a student, from a scholar, from firsthand experience. So all of these things cumulatively brought me here today. And I also believe it's divine intervention because I feel that if I could break certain cycles, we all can.
That's beautiful. That was very beautiful. So with that, I think knowing what you know now, I mean, from your experiences, and once again, thank you for your transparency. I know it's not easy to reveal things like that. Um, Knowing what you know now after all of your education and your experience in dealing with some of your patients, before we dive too deep in, um, would you have done anything differently in the beginning, or do you feel like it was just your journey to get to this path?
Honestly, it was a journey and it was a long one, probably a 15-year one. Because I was that single mom, Latina, at 21 with a son, and 4 years later with a daughter, with a society telling me that I couldn't and I wouldn't and I shouldn't. And I was the first generation Latina to go on and get her advanced degree, youngest of nine. So I definitely feel like it happened that way for a reason, because a lot of the clients that I encounter are just like me. And again, what separates me from the other psychologists and therapists? Well, you go to their office and you get put into kind of this kind of stereotypical, category. But to walk a mile in the person's shoes and to understand, it's just a tremendous blessing, I will say. But it's so powerful because the influence you have to save lives, and just, not the accolades with the books or the literature that I've done, but with people saying, you saved my life.
Mhm.
That's my living legacy. That's my calling and purpose. And there's nothing greater in this world.
Yeah, that's powerful.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Um, this past Sunday, September 17th, it was National Physician Suicide Awareness Day, NPSA. For someone who is not familiar with the Awareness Day, could you probably give us a behind the scenes thought process on how one should approach this holiday, or more so memoriam?
Yeah. That's broad. And when we think about physicians and we think about the way the world has changed, overall well-being in healthcare has really plummeted since the pandemic. And people are not yet understanding, what it has done, and the way it has taxed people's not just overall health, their mind, but their souls, right? And I think it's important to recognize work compression in healthcare. What's happening with bureaucracy is that they're pushing us to do more numbers and more papers and length of stay and get people in and out the hospital, and bring revenue and do research, but we're human. And so not just focusing on general population wellness, but I think wellness in healthcare is something that needs to be continued to be looked at, and a paradigm shift in medicine as a whole. It is now at its beginning peak, that they're establishing surveys and literature to assess, burnout rates and suicide rates within physicians as well. It is not as uncommon as you may think. So I think just creating awareness for a space for us to even begin those conversations, to talk about prevention, to talk about recognizing signs and fatigue in people. Like, how do we see how, you're sitting there, Sean, you work, let's say in a hospital, and you see something different about Dr. So-and-so, what do you do? How can we be preemptive? So again, awareness that we are all in humanity, one and the same. We need to look out for each other, and we need to be comfortable. Sometimes you don't want to, you fear retaliation in the chain of command, having methods, confidential methods to communicate that, but recognizing that medicine is becoming increasingly more driven by numbers um, than we might want to admit, and that alone takes away from, our own Socratic oaths, do no harm, and our ability to want to help, right? So I think, just creating awareness to that with the specific governing bodies of medicine. Each specialty will have a different governing body of medicine to put caps on workload, to put hours that, are manageable, that people should not be sleep deprived, and what does that look like? And to put systems and stop gaps in place and keep safes for faculty as well.
I agree. I agree. And I think the scapegoat for a while has been the fact that there are KPIs that are not shown on this in the right rooms. I mean, they look at bottom lines, they look at performance, they look at, how many patients have you seen, right? It's a fee for service market. But to your point, where's the value?
Correct.
And anytime you talk about value-based care, I mean, the traditional sense of physicians, they get nervous about that because that impacts their pocket. But to exactly what you're saying is why we're having this conversation today. And I think just growing up myself, there was a stigma around just all around talking about mental health. But I guess I would want to ask you, why don't you think more people talk about suicide prevention awareness?
That is huge. And so, reasons people don't talk about suicide is the stigma around mental health issues, right? There's that. There's also something called the fear of contagion. And that's that some individuals believe that if you talk about it openly, we'll have copycats or people, that are in vulnerable populations that want to like mimic this behavior. There's the theory that, and not even a theory, but there's a true for some that it's discomfort, right? It's uncomfortable and that it's taboo. Death by suicide is an uncomfortable topic. And they don't feel knowledgeable to address it. So it's like, why am I going to go there? It's like opening up Pandora's box.
Mhm.
Lack of awareness of what resources are available and how to address it. Then there's cultural and religious beliefs that preclude it, right? Some even condemn it. You'll go to hell. God said you're a sinner. That's the devil. Um, People suffer in silence because they have internalized stigma by a lot of the social constructs that we see today in cultures as well. Latino culture per se. You're not crazy. We don't believe in mental health. You can take medication. Nothing's wrong with you. Shut up, be quiet. Kids can be seen and not heard. In the BIPOC communities at large, you're supposed to be stronger. Men can't cry. Certain behaviors are not acceptable. So they suffer in silence. Then we look at movies, okay, so people are in insane asylums, mass shootings, all these things. And the people look like us, you and me. And that also contributes to internalized stigma. So if I already have to go against the grain of showing up as who I am, and where does the shame go? I internalize it. I shut down. I lock it in my throat. I don't say anything. Now I'm depressed. Now I'm anxious. Now I'm going down the pipeline with mental health illness. Still don't say anything, right? And it
Mhm.
just becomes progressive and more complex. Sexual assault victims, people that have been through tremendous trauma, they are ashamed. They are embarrassed. Someone has rendered them powerless, has done something so horrible to them that they don't know how and don't feel safe enough to be vulnerable with this information. Um, so it's multiple reasons.
Mhm. I was gonna just chime on that. Do you feel trauma might be the biggest fear people may have when why they wouldn't discuss suicide prevention or what to do to get around it?
So it is definitely a component, and a big component is the fear, correct. However, there's comorbidities and a lot of things that can cause suicide. So, there's also not just mental health stuff, but biological illness that can cause people to have delusions and all kinds of psychosis. And then, they come into the ER, we see them as a psych patient, and then we recognize that there was a thyroid disease and it was causing X, Y, and Z. Um, so we first have to rule out biological illness, and then it goes into mental illness. But to answer that, it can be a combination of many factors rather than just one single cause.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point, right? And that's one of the biggest things that we try to bring with these conversations is the education piece. So you mentioned a lot of things, right? There could be the mental health portion of this, or actual physical, biological needs. What are some other things that people could do to really educate themselves when it comes to suicide prevention?
When it comes to education of suicide prevention, there's multiple things. So one of the things we want to learn, and I can provide psychoeducation on that today, is basically you're asking, what do you do when someone is threatening to commit suicide or threatening self-harm, and this kind of like, is it real, is it not real situation, right? Are they crying wolf, are they being fake, is to take every threat seriously.
Mhm.
Even at its lowest form, a threat of suicide is a cry for help.
Hmm.
And recognizing that we can never be certain, are they going to do it or not, right? So, also understanding that warning signs are different, right? So, warning signs are things like, chronic medical conditions, previous suicide attempt, if they have like a family history, are they using substances? Was there a recent trauma? Are there financial or legal problems? Any mental illness or history of like PTSD, depression? If you know the person, you know a little bit of their background, and that's already going on, that puts them at a higher risk, right? So understanding like the risk factors, and that everyone who has suicidal ideation doesn't mean that they're going to attempt it, and that's where this cry wolf theory comes. But that's an indication of a mental health issue. So even if they're not going to pull the trigger, probably depression is going on there. And we want to stopgap it. We want to prevent it. So if we can catch it when it's at this little phase, right? Because there's a spectrum, then we can prevent it from progressing. And so if we think of everything like a spectrum, not everyone's going to have the most severe case, but it always starts at point A.
Mhm.
So we never want to take anything for granted. There's a plethora of information, like crisis health lines. The that I think the information is almost at everyone's fingertips at this point. So I would encourage everyone to go out and seek out that help. But if you're not sure and you encounter the situation, you yourself, even if you're not suicidal, should reach out to a mental health professional. It's going to impact your health at some time, right? It's very draining to hear, and how do you respond? So someone can give you that guidance, and it's important.
And
Absolutely.
that's got to be such a heavy cross to bear in the case where if I'm not comfortable with talking about suicide, and then to your point I have someone who's clearly presenting with signs and let's say just environmental reasons to them for why they would want to do suicide. I think it's just it's always going to be one of those tough conversations to have. I mean, me personally, if it's not for the diversity work that's going on within the hospital that has put this information in front of me and allowed me the grace to digest it in the best way that I could, I just think about some of my friends and family and other colleagues that this is not a part of their day to day. How do they now have that transformation into being able to at least be present in these conversations and be aware?
I will tell you that that is even common for the psychologists and therapists, right? It is not the norm, even though there's a million deaths by suicide every year nationally. Um, we go into school and we're trained, but there's no real, dedication, specializing in suicide alone. And then we see that the literature at best is written by, people that don't look like us.
Mhm.
So we face that
Can't
when
relate.
we walk into the room, right?
Hmm.
Um, what I would say is that you don't have to approach it directly. One of my recommendations, if you notice someone and they have changes in behavior, they're not, hygiene is poor, they're isolating, They are just withdrawn. They're giving away their things, which is a huge red flag, right? They're acting reckless. They're very irritable. And that's someone that you care about. It's as simple as, hey, I noticed that you haven't been yourself. Are you okay? Is there anything that I can help with? You don't have to mention suicide at all,
Hmm.
right? Um, I think maybe, we should seek some help. There must be something going on, right? You can have the indication, but you're not the professional, and that kind of gives you a segue. And we have to get away from being afraid of talking about suicide,
I
right?
agree. I
Yeah,
Um,
agree.
that's why we're here. That's why we're here.
yeah, and and kind of normalizing it, but for now, right? That's a baby step. And let's just say, just treating it no different than we would any other illness. You broke your leg, let's go to the emergency room. Someone
Hmm.
wants to commit suicide, you go to the emergency room, especially if they have a means and an intent to do it. Don't poo-poo it like
Hmm.
often people do, because again, it's like, I'm afraid, I don't want to piss them off. Well, you rather be err on the side of caution than the latter.
And that's where I almost want to kind of jump back on the statement you said before, as far as a cry wolf individual. Now I know you stated that it'd be best to try to catch that at the beginning phase, but
Hmm.
say you do, you prevent you prevent the situation from happening.
Hmm.
If this continues, do you continue to jump for this individual of every threat, every phone call?
No. So there's boundaries, right? So number one is that you cannot accept culpability for whether or not someone wants to kill themselves. Not even the therapist or the psychologist or the psychiatrist or the medical professional can. We can treat them, but once they walk out, if they have a true intent on killing themselves, they're going to kill themselves,
Mm,
right? We are doing the best we can to try to prevent it and to get resources, but keeping that in your mind, because, I see a lot of people that come in and then it's like, well, having guilt. I didn't see it. I could have done something more. And the reality is you did the best with what you had.
mm. Okay.
Yeah.
You cannot. But when someone is continuously being manipulative or using it, and it happens a lot with mental illness because they'll know how to manipulate certain things and certain, um, you know, but again, we know that that's a person who's unwell and probably has a mood or personality disorder. Maybe they're not taking medication, maybe something else is going on, but it's putting clear boundaries where it says, I love you and I care about you and I want to be here for you, but I cannot be your sole support.
All right.
I'm not equipped
That's heavy.
I'm not equipped, but I'd be happy to help you get some resources or, to connect you with the doctor. If you want me to go to the appointment with you, once in a while, I can, but, and trying to help them see their other protective factors, but relinquishing that need to rescue, because at best you can support someone, but you can't save fully anyone. People have to save themselves.
All right. And I think what you mentioned earlier too, the cultural impact is so important. I've seen people learn a lot of information when it comes to a particular subject, and then they'll bring it into that environment that has probably been completely oblivious to this topic, and they try to introduce it, and they are completely shunned and rejected. And it's in those moments where I think people can show fortitude and stay true to it and know that at some point someone within that circle is going to need that information, and the fact that they have it and they aren't afraid to share it and help that person out is really going to be important. So if anybody is listening right now and you are within that, just know you are of value, and it is going to be okay.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And, the need to rescue is real. And I think anyone with a good heart has it. And it's understanding that we can only support, right? And that's the biggest takeaway from me as a clinician, because you can see someone really sinking and you want to go in and pull them out, but you can't, right? You can
Mhm.
only provide support and guidance and interventions. Is just knowing that being there, physically being there, even if you're saying nothing, you don't have the words,
Mhm.
is so healing. We are wired for human connection. Many a times when people are going through depression, not even many times, all times, their vision isn't clear. They feel like they don't have anyone. They're destitute. They're alone. Your mere follow-up and presence could save a life.
Mm,
Yeah, that is a great point.
I get it. I get it. Now, one more, I guess, follow up as far as to the cry wolf scenario. You've realized that this person can do harm. You outside of pointing them in the right direction. Is there a safer way to remove yourself from that person's circle, or is there a way to not be that person's lifeline anymore and also not bear responsibility, like you were talking about earlier? Does that even exist?
Sure, you're saying someone with an actual intent and plan to kill themselves. So I will deviate a bit and then answer that question.
Okay.
So suicidal ideation and suicidal attempt are two separate entities, and they're real. And we assess for them when someone comes and presents, with suicidal thoughts. Um, Ideation is more of like a fantasy, like I wish it would end. I don't want to be here anymore, and it's like, but do you want to kill yourself?
Mhm.
Yeah, I do. Okay. Do you have a plan? No, I don't have a plan. All right. This person is crying for help. We're not going to admit that person, but we're going to get them help, right? And then there's the person with suicidal attempt. And when we talk about risk factors, that's like, yeah, I thought about it. I have my gun locked and loaded, da da da. I'm going to do this and that. Just, put it right through my mouth. And here we go. That is a 72-hour hold in the ER at most, and then probably a transfer to an inpatient psych unit, right?
Mhm.
Um, and that's not something that you could manage or necessarily remove yourself from. Um, that's a 911 call. you know,
Yeah.
and when they come out, hopefully they come more stabilized. But you have to have a lot of love for yourself, right? And just being an overall well person is, if this is not something you have the bandwidth for, that you do
Mhm.
not accept the assignment, and you should not hold guilt for it either. And I hope that helps. I know that many people won't want to hear that, but if you're doing something that you don't really feel comfortable doing or wanting to do, at best it's disingenuous, right? And even that is going to be, people that have went through trauma could read through bullshit a mile away. So how helpful is that really going to be, right? So, but maybe just a conversation, an honest conversation, saying, I care, but this is a lot for me right now,
Mhm.
and I'll pray for you. I want the best for you, but I just don't know what to do. Rather than abandonment,
Yeah.
we don't want
And
to abandon, but we want to be honest.
yeah, and I think we are in very scary times. If you just look at what's happening around the world, and to your point, since the pandemic, I think between 2021 and 2022, I think suicide rate is at damn near a million. And I think we are in a time where there's not enough love out there. People aren't really listening anymore. They're talking, or their lives are moving so fast that they don't really have time to pay attention. So just finding ways to do that a little bit more, but also to your point of giving yourself the grace that you can only control but so much, and that's your actions, not someone else's. So to everything Emerita just said, I think this is just a really good conversation to have. It is National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, so it's very timely. But we like to take on the tough conversations here at FCP because we are trying to break that stigma, and it's very, very important. So I think at this time we're going to make a quick transition to some do's and don'ts. I think along with all the gems that Amrita has shared with us, it's only right to talk about how you may start a conversation somewhat with someone. And we really just pull these from some resources online, Amrita, but you can also share your advice and your thoughts on them as we go through this.
Sure.
So you can see some of the do's here. Say someone died by suicide, refer to suicide as something that is preventable. list warning signs versus the two don'ts here, where it's like don't use the term commit suicide, which I have to admit I actually learned during this research
Hmm.
because I was one of those people who were faultly saying commit suicide. It's not a crime. And then, describing suicide as successful. I mean, I've never actually heard someone say that, but to know that's out there is almost scary to me. So when you see some of these, I won't go verbatim for them. Where does it take you? Does it align with some of your thoughts and your teachings?
Yes, absolutely. The committing part, the language is so important. Discourse is so important, because again, it goes back to social construct, right? And what we're talking about. And one thing that I wanted to mention was just the disparities, right? In Latino and BIPOC communities. And so part of the reason for you saying that, like that commit, we want to take that out, and being careful, what we lend our money to, right? Even in the movies and things like that, is to deconstruct and dismantle the discriminatory practices that keep people oppressed and that keep inequality within patient care. So words like this, people might think it's just so simple, commit suicide. But if we dig deeper and we go down to root cause analysis, we can see, where does that come from?
Mhm.
Like you said, no one commits suicide, but do we commit suicide?
Mhm.
Um, it came from somewhere, you know,
Yep,
and language is important.
Hmm.
absolutely. So as we go here, some more don'ts. Use stigmatizing language that labels people. She's depressed. He's bipolar. I think that is something that is inherited at what I call the kitchen table.
Yeah.
Depending on who you grew up around, who you talk to on a routine basis, and how they look at certain terminology and situations that they don't understand, they will pass on this language that is very inappropriate. Versus the dudes where she has depression,
Yeah.
he has a bipolar disorder, just a bit more understanding on that.
So yeah, I'll jump in, Sean. Um, that's actually very spot on, because it's also something with that we call cognitive behavioral therapy, which is over identification with a disease, over identification with a job. If I say to myself psychologically, I have depression, I have internalized that depression. It is a part of who I am and how I behave and how I show up in this world. I
Hmm.
suffer from depression separates me from the illness. Now, when we're building resilience and healing, we need to see ourselves as a whole person. We're not all we're the sum of parts, and all of our parts play a role. But that kind of one piece will hijack the brain, right? And now I am ill, I feel sick, I act sick, I whatever. So part of the healing process is training the brain, and the brain is neuroplastic, right? To see a different pathway outside of depression, to see that there is hope, to see that there is love, to see that, what, our brain is just a little foggy right now, right? There's some chemicals and neurotransmitters missing. And it is as granular as language. Your language plays an important part in your psychological health. If you are depression, you will be depressed. If you suffer with depression, you can combat depression. You can overcome.
And we have conversations like this all the time. Even last week on our live, we talked about a quote from Bruce Lee where he says, "When you have to be careful how you use words against you because you internalize them and they become energy." So I'm really glad you are bringing that up because in some conversations you'll hear people talk about, they'll body shame themselves and then laugh after it, and you'll tell them, don't do that because you are internalizing that. You're going to create a reality of this thought that you're having. And I don't know if people laugh it off because they don't want to deal directly with the issue, but I'm just glad you're addressing that here on this conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
On this last slide here, these are some more do's and don'ts for, I guess, keywords and terminology that can help prevent a suicide. Some of the main don'ts were try to minimize problems or shame a person into changing their mind. Don't try to convince a person who is suicidal that it's not that bad, and also don't preach about suicide being right or wrong. They more so lean towards tell them what they are experiencing is treatable, and that suicidal feelings are temporary. They also want you to reassure them that treatment and help is always available. And lastly, let the person talk and make sure you listen to them without judgment. Could you let us know your, I guess, your clinical standpoint on these do's and don'ts for keywords of prevention?
Absolutely. So creating a safe space, number one, with non-judgment is paramount. We have heard cases where it's like, oh, you're selfish, you're going to try to commit suicide or you're this or that. Like, that is absolutely not the route you want to go. But you covered a lot, and, creating a safe space is paramount. Um, in addition to that, in terms of prevention, um, we never want to see someone isolating or alone, and making sure that you're following up with people, and that you are, if you can, like like you said, sometimes, what if it's this person that is just over the top. Making sure that they're connected to services, or just at least at the best you can provide those services. But never being, judgmental, holding space, remembering that, it's okay not to understand, to not understand, to be afraid, to be uncomfortable, to be all of those things. You don't need to have the answers, right? Just supply the resources. But the biggest thing that is coming to me and coming forth right now is to refrain from judgment, to keep a listening and opening ear, active listening, and to be educated enough to connect them with services, or if it's more acute, to enact the ER or something of that nature. You want to take everything seriously. I can't even stress that enough. Um, One problem that we see is that when patients come to the ER, and let's say they're in there for a suicidal attempt, they're held for 72 hours, and then they leave within a week or two, it is likely that they will commit suicide again. So for the families watching, it's a critical time. Don't leave them alone. Follow up. Just being there is important. It shows them that they are loved. And your presence is the most powerful tool. You don't have to know how to deal with it. Just being there can change a life, can save a life, can do a whole lot of healing. Again, we are wired for human connection. When we are left alone in isolation with these illnesses, a lot of awful things happen. The healing process can only happen in therapeutic alliance because they're with someone that can be the conduit to that healing. You cannot heal alone.
Very true.
Powerful words.
Yeah, and no one should either. It's an extremely difficult task to try to heal yourself solo. It's not meant. That's why you go to doctors and facilities so that they can help you and heal you.
The science shows. I mean, look what happens with children that are neglected, right? And during divorce, during separations, right? What happens to people? Their health declines. We
Right.
are beings with souls, right? Mind body connection. And when the mind and the body and the heart are disconnected, we have all sorts of issues. So you go to the emergency room, and you're like, oh, I feel like I'm having a heart attack, per se, right? And the doctor's like, no, it's not a heart attack, but it was like a panic attack, right? But I didn't, never had any health issues. I'm not going through any significant trauma. One of the things that I want to add is, hey, sensory memory, right? So even if the trauma is not recent that you went through, and it's coming up through your subconscious, and you're having panic and you're having anxiety, something happened. It could be years ago. Now we have suicidal thoughts, suicidal intent. So don't always assume like it had to be in the immediate auspices. Your body keeps the score. Your body keeps the score of cumulative traumas. Maybe you could survive the first one, you could survive the second one, the third one, and you came back unscathed, and people are like, oh my God, like you're so strong. And the fifth one knocks you all the way on your, you know what, on your high knee, and you're like, I can't get up, I can't get up, right? And everybody's looking at you. That wasn't even as bad as the first one. So we have memory, and these traumas stored over time or what makes things like this happen and the illnesses exacerbate. So even understanding someone's personal history is so important,
Mhm.
you know?
And I think these conversations are so important too, because as we raise the next generation, we get to break a lot of those, I want to say, challenges that were presented. And this in no way is to blame our parents for anything, right? They were dealing with certain things, certain environmental situations that they had no control over. But us now being a little bit more aware, a little bit more educated, the hope is that we leave that safe space for our children to show them that it's okay to be loved, it's okay to kiss them, it's okay to talk about anything that's going on that they feel like they need a better understanding on. And I think as parents, the more aware we make ourselves, the better equipped we'll be for those conversations. I'm not saying it's going to be an easy one. You may not even have all the answers, but hopefully what you're hearing from Emerita today can really guide you in those situations that probably before you shied away from and told them to toughen up. Now the next time you'll actually be more present and be able to interject and give them that love and support that they really need.
Thanks, Sean. That's really good, because we have to become comfortable with talking about the uncomfortable. We have to become comfortable with not being okay. It's okay to not be okay.
Mhm.
And as parents, we have to give our children the we have to role model um, healthy behaviors. So if they don't have a place to come and challenge, and why are they challenging you? So in our cultures, and I'm just going to generalize, so if I'm offending anyone, disclaimer, apology in advance, but at least in my Latino culture, it was heavily you do what I say and that's it, right? And you sit down and you shut up and you sit like that, and this is what it's going to be. And then what happens is we become adults that respond in the world in a very immature fashion. We don't know how to show up in relationships. We don't know how to advocate for ourselves. So whatever you're teaching your child from young is going to translate to the maladaptive adult behavior. Why is the child challenging you? Because you're their safe space. They can't do that in the street with anybody else. So consider it a compliment.
Mhm.
Yes, you got to guide them. Yes, you got to give them boundaries, but with love, with grace. Because when you attack a child and the child loses their voice, you have internalized trauma again. And then the adult now, child grows to adult, comes to my office, and every time they get into some kind of altercation, they shut down. And I feel a lump in my throat. I feel like a ball, like, and I'm like, oh, the trauma's there, like, and what happened? And we go down to childhood trauma, and always, always, always. And you know what? Unfortunately, you can learn a new behavior, but you can't undo the memory.
Mhm.
So you're managing that for the rest of your life. So, parents, I urge you to allow kids to explore, to experience, to challenge, and to remember that you're role modeling the behaviors they're going to show up and exhibit in this world for a lifetime. So, breaking generational curses, things that were passed down to us, are so key because mental health issues always existed. Now they're beginning to like allow us to talk about it, right? To have this platform.
Yeah.
Um, and we can prevent a lot of this.
I agree. The one thing I would be remiss not to talk about are those who have lost someone to suicide. The You mentioned earlier the guilt. The common sentence that I hear, Emrita, is, "What could I have done? Could I have done more?" Some of the stories you will hear is everything was perfectly fine. They were smiling. They were happy. There were no signs,
Mhm.
and then this happens. They died by suicide. What could you offer for those people who are in that grief state where they just feel like it's their fault?
Feel like I want to address two parts. Number one is that depression has no face. So you're saying, they looked happy, they were happy. Um, no, they weren't. They just didn't show it. Um, you can only deal with what you know, and when you don't know, you can't, right? Again, if someone has the intent to kill themselves, even if you try to prevent it, they will do what they need to do to succeed. So we can't hold that responsibility. In terms of grief, um, there's so many different stages of grief, right? There's the denial, there's bargaining, being angry with God. There is anger that goes with it. Healing is not linear. You're going to have a roller coaster of emotions that go up and down, and you're really going to need a professional to guide you through that, to kind of what we call is complete the story. So someone has died abruptly, something was ripped from you. There's great grief because there was great love. Um, and it just happened too soon. So reshaping that narrative, and honoring them in a way and making peace. But truly and honestly, it's really hard to do that on your own. I would actually be floored if you told me that you could. You need a professional to guide you through that process. So I will say for anyone that's suffering with someone that has taken their lives, please reach out to a mental health professional, so that they can guide you through that process, dealing with the underlying, because it's more complex, issues of where this guilt, where the shame is stored, and why, and how to come through to the other side.
Thank you so much, Amrita. Very, very helpful words. And I think that is a good transition to talk about your company, right? And I think in the name of the company is exactly what we're talking about: pathways to healing and social justice. First of all, I guess, what made you want to start this company or movement, I would say?
I thought I could change the world. I want to change the world. No, literally, that sounds funny, but it's so true. I am a cycle breaker. I am an advocate. I am a fighter. I'm a survivor. I'm a warrior. And I just saw too many things, that were not right systemically, that need to be changed within my own institution. And within, Congress. So like I've went to Albany and lobbied with Congress. I've been a constituent. I've, done things because, for he who does not oppose injustice, you're an accomplice to the act. So if you're not in it and on the ground running, then, step out of my way. And even if I could just do grassroots, I'm doing something, that will help my children, that will help societies, that will help people in need. And that's one of the reasons why I pursued this, secondary degree in immigration, seeing, certain injustices there. Um, that just it's heartbreaking, right? Families being torn apart, things that are happening in this world, um, and just being a Latina with my own experiences and having had to come across issues where I was made to be the imposter. I was made, you're the Spanish woman, you don't have a seat at the table, and it's like, no, I belong here, and I'm going to sit my butt right here. Thank you, you know. But I had to fight my way through it. So I said, you know what? I have to give that back to the world because I made it. So that means other people can make it. And when I mean started from the bottom, now we're here. It was like the very bottom, like
Um,
the very bottom. And again, it goes back to being a calling and a purpose. So I dedicated my career to learning about trauma, to service. I've worked, on call in the emergency room where they would call me and say, "There's a new sexual assault case, meet her in the ER," doing a rape kit, like going up, like she's being my client. In the middle of the night, like I've given back to the communities in so many ways. And now, that's high acuity. Now I have taken it to private practice. But the most rewarding thing for me is just knowing that, I'm helping the underprivileged, the underserviced. And I feel like we all have a civic duty to do so. But it's only a few of us that are brave. That's why I'm glad that you both are here. And I thank you for giving me this platform, because we got to do it, right? And we have to represent us. are people that look like us. Not that I'm promoting, injustice or of Caucasians. Or I'm all inclusive. I love everyone, but we're underrepresented.
Right.
And I don't want that for future generations. So that's what drove me to build this practice, which is becoming a group practice. Again, I am a trauma informed clinician. I've done a lot of guest lectures and speaking. I am in a tertiary medical center, Columbia University. I'm a director there. I sit on so many committees, and I'm happy to say that in each of those that I serve, my goal, ethically and morally, is to fight against inequity, speak against disparities, and to promote that we hire and that we recruit more people that represent the populations we serve. So it's just a passion, a calling, and a need.
Thank you so much. And I know you're going to do great things. I can hear the passion in your voice. And just from going on the website, I mean, my second question was going to be about the quote that you used, but you
Yes.
answered that already.
Yes.
So I guess I'll ad lib real quick. I'm a professional leader, and I see a very big need within my team, my company, my organization to have or create a safe space to talk about grief, to talk about mental health, to talk about someone with potential suicidal thoughts. What is one real good step I could take in order to foster the most beneficial conversation?
Are we talking global perspective, top down, or individual?
Global.
Global. You have to get buy in from the top down. I would start, since you're in healthcare, doing some getting data numbers. That's all they care about. I'll be honest with you. With the proposal on the suicides and physician suicide rates, they're high. They're out there, and how that translates to quality or poor quality in patient outcomes. And why we need to do this. And also using the Accreditation Council for Postgraduate Medical Education. They accredit all of your residency and fellowship programs. They are focused now on faculty well-being. So telling them that medicine is shifting that way, that you want to be ahead of the curve, and that you're interested in designing a program and thinking about what that curriculum would look like. If you want to collab on the side, that's what I do. But having the proposal well put, well thought out, creating buy-in. Why do they need to invest in this? Why do they need to kind of, host the lunch or host the dinner, whatever? Honestly, I don't think it'll be too hard, because they probably have heard about the paradigm shift. I hope, right? It's a global thing, but it's always from the top down, getting buy-in from either your chairman or your graduate medical education department, and just a little proposal, 2 pages, and then they will then form a committee, like we call them like a search committee, see what the need is in the community, how that translate. And you can even potentially get a research project out of that, but it would be amazing, and it's needed. And showing that it, like, your institution could lead that, because it's not, there's not that much literature yet.
So what if I am a manager within this company and they haven't taken that top down approach, but I want to create something at least for a couple of the individuals within my team?
Do it.
What step do I have?
You don't even need their approval for that. So these programs do exist, right? We did some legwork in terms of research. One of them is the Charm Force at Sinai. But you can design something, or you can collab with someone that knows how to build programs. That's pretty much what I do. I built over 20 programs at Columbia. So you can certainly do it on your own, in your small division or whatever sector you have. I tell you that it can also latch on, and it'll probably be a domino effect. It can be super impactful. You capacity build. So you start small, because if you start big and then it doesn't work out, right? So you want to pilot it first. But it always goes down to a statement of need. What is the need and why are we doing it? And once you do that, then you can build goals and objectives, and then you monitor for efficacy. But certainly can do it, and it sounds more complicated than it is, but it's easy, it's doable. You just have to have the time.
Yeah, and I hope anybody listening, because I know I hear a lot of people who are just looking for guidance, looking to make sure they do it the best way possible, right? But with any tough conversation, I think you can't be afraid to fail.
No,
And I think as long as you do enough research and you do it genuinely and with passion and with concern and care, I think you will execute it the right way. And you can watch this episode again just to
and
get the information.
Sean, real quick, do if you want to start Qualtrics survey, send out a survey,
Hmm.
and you'll see from your peers what what they need, what they know, what their level of knowledge is, and that's where wherever the gap is, that's where you want to be.
Absolutely. All right. So, one more question before we wrap up. You're elected governor of New Jersey. What is your first order of business to address social injustices?
Oh man.
No pressure.
No pressure. You threw me a curveball. Okay. My first order of social for New Jersey. Whew, do you know it would be for the child welfare services. And DIFUS, if you're listening, guns are blazing and loaded.
Mm,
I did intensive in community work here in New Jersey, and I filed reports for children that were I would never want to take a child out of the home, but like severely unsafe conditions, I will say. And I was met with such resistance. And, oh, we don't have this, we don't have that, change the note, change that. And I resigned because there wasn't enough services. It broke my heart that these kids are, it's like checking a box, right? So, okay, I saw the kid, okay, go. But you're not really doing effective work. If you have a program, you have to make sure it has resources. They need more resources. I'm not trying to throw them under the bus, but they need more resources, Governor, if you're listening. It is honestly grossly unacceptable. And it's not just the opinion of Ms. Verdejo, but everyone that I have spoke to in that line of work feels the same way. And if you're spending that much money to pay people, maybe some of that should be invested in resources. It doesn't make any sense. And we're talking about suicide. I mean, these kids are at risk at large. Patterson, Passaic County. Certain, I was going into homes and like they were like squatter homes. And kids, I don't have a jacket. Miss Verdejo, can you buy me a jacket? And then I'm like trying to get them resources, and there's nothing.
yeah.
Not a second. These are citizens. We're not even talking about immigrants. Like you take enough taxes out of our check. Come on.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Well,
Well, you have my vote for sure.
God
Thank
bless you. I don't got the heart to, tell kids no in unfortunate situations. But to
Oh,
see in that capacity, I ain't got it.
I don't have it either. I shed so many tears, and unethically, and I don't want to lose my license, but there's times where you just go in your pocket. You're not supposed to, but you're like, you know what? I am a Christian. I've got like this. She's freezing. It's
Yes.
doing so. And I can't even see her in her house because her house is decrepit. I have to take her to Dunkin' Donuts down the block, and that's allowed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a common issue amongst a lot of companies. It's like put your money where your mouth is, but a lot of the times
Yeah.
the true leaders who are really passionate behind the work are the ones coming out of pocket just to
Yep.
fund certain situations. So
Very true.
So it looks good on paper, right? But the reality.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Listen, Emerita, this was amazing.
Yes.
Truly, truly amazing. I've learned so much. Kenny, how about you?
Man, I was cool. I was happy being a fly in the window. Just hearing this conversation, it was super awesome. I got my questions answered early, and everything else was just a bonus. You know what I mean? This was thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you for having me. You guys are a blessing. And thank you for doing this.
Oh yeah, definitely. We'll have you back for something. I feel like you have too much of a wealth of knowledge, not to dive into some more topics.
Mhm.
So before we wrap up, any last words, and you want to share some contact information?
Sure. So my website is up, pathways to healing and social justice llc.com. You'll see it on the bottom there. Again, I'm trauma informed, so that's pretty much everything and anything. I see adults, children's, and couples. I have a group practice. I participate with insurances as well if you're interested. For the immigration population and for immigration attorneys, I do psychological evaluations, very important, and we need that right now given the crises. So happy to, if you have a question, you can always email me, even if you're not looking for services, and I can connect you because I'm also partnered with the Latino Mental Health Association and a lot of good networks in New Jersey. So I can always refer out as well. And I'm just here to help. I'm blessed to bless. And I just want to spread that word that we're all in this life together. No man is an island. And if I can help you, feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much. Any last things from you, Kenny?
No, thank you. Have an awesome night, and we will definitely have to do some sort of part two, repackage something. We got to get you back. It's way too much information. We didn't get it all. An hour
Okay.
wasn't enough.
I'm excited. I look forward to it.
Definitely. All right. So I just had some quick parting words, and I had to write this down just because I wanted to make sure I got my thoughts out right. So people often don't want to talk about something until it directly impacts them. And then what I find is there's a scramble for information, and due to the lack of awareness from their inner circle, because of the reluctance to talk about a particular situation, they are faced with finding this information on their own. Knowing the best suggestion would be to seek expert help, but then depending on your experience with the healthcare industry or just a stigma of seeking professional help, there's hindrances and obstacles there as well. As so just in personal opinion, that's really just my personal opinion. I feel the more that we can have these conversations, especially within our own underrepresented groups, I think that would be very beneficial. So I say that to say that don't let the conversation end here. This will be saved on our YouTube page. Make sure that you subscribe. We are Freedom Cage Podcast. I am Senor Lee, Ken Kapnick. We do this every Wednesday at 8 o'clock live. And I want to thank you again, Emerita Verdejo, for being here and blessing us with all of these gems. And I hope everyone that attended tonight leaves here a little bit more aware and knowing that it is okay to
Yes.
not be okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.